Welcome to Patient. I am Mary Elizabeth Williams. This is Anna Rollins with me today. We're going to have such a great conversation. I cannot wait. She is the author of an amazing new book called Famished on food, sex, and growing up a good girl. She's also a writer. Her works appeared in the New York Times, Slate, Electric Literature, Newsweek, other places. She's an award-winning writing instructor, and she's a 2025 West Virginia Creative Network Literary Arts Fellow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a big deal. So I'm going to start with you. By the way, congratulations on the book. It's really great. I loved it. I loved how subtle and nuanced and open-hearted and forgiving and generous it really is. I'm going to get into all of that, but I like to start with the question that I hope you've got an answer for. What was the healthcare experience, Anna, that radicalized you?
Ooh. Well, when I had my second son, I had a traumatic postpartum experience. I got very sick, my husband got very sick, and then within a few months, my son was very sick. And so I grew up in this very conservative culture, and I think I kind of believed that if you worked hard enough and if you were good, that would protect you from bad things happening to you. And I know that was not ever explicitly said, but I think that was like something that was communicated to me in a lot of religious instruction and in a lot of the political ideology that the people around me adhered to. And when I went through that postpartum experience where I just saw the world dropping out of so many areas of my life, I realized my own precarity and need. And I realized that we can't just rely on our will, like we need community. And so my politics really shifted in that experience. I mean, they were starting to shift prior to that. I was kind of coming to see those things, but it was really just the drama of seeing my world fall out despite my best efforts.
Despite your best efforts, despite your need for control, you write in this book about that relationship between purity culture, fundamental Christianity, diet culture, and control, and how all of these manifest in these very compulsive ways, which is, I think, really true and really interesting, and the ways in which eating disorders are often very closely tied to OCD or compulsive behaviors and intrusive thoughts. Talk to me a little bit about when you connected those dots.
Hmm. I mean, I think that this was something that I had been working through for a lot of my adult life. I grew up in this very conservative and fundamentalist environment, and I when I left and I was around people who had more diverse beliefs and more like whenever I expanded my community, I was starting to work through how some of the thought processes that I dealt with my whole life that had been really harmful to me, I was starting to work through how that all of that was connected with my faith ideology. And so I worked through a lot of it through writing and also through just reading independently. And then as that wasn't enough, I couldn't just like heal myself through reading and writing when I started to reach out for help. That's really when I started to connect the dots whenever I started going to therapy, like not just mental health therapy, but also like pelvic floor physical therapy. Like I saw how these beliefs that I'd kind of embodied, how they were affecting my entire health.
I want to take, so let's go back. Let's take a little ride back in time to where all of these things are first manifesting. There's so many great lines in this book. One of them that I really, really love is any need exposed my inherent sinfulness. I was taught early that I was totally depraved, which meant everything I desired was bad too. There it is, right? Wanting, needing, being hungry. The book is called Famished. Being hungry in that kind of a context can feel sinful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
And you're
you,
not alone in this. You're growing up with this. You have a generation of mothers ahead of you who are also behaving this way. You have peers who are taking in these messages. What is it like when that is normalized?
well, and you don't have the language to describe that, right? When you're a young girl and you're being given these messages that everything you want, not even like things that are explicitly sin, but even the good things are bad, when you're always playing that game of, but maybe this good thing is actually this nefarious thing, when you're always like kind of caught in that mental loop, it really makes you constantly questioning, unable to really listen to intuition or discernment. And it's kind of teaching you, like my theology, my religious instruction was teaching me obsessive compulsive thought behaviors. Like I was later diagnosed with OCD, and that's probably something that I am like I lean toward having, but it was also something I was taught in my theology to always be in that mental loop of questioning the self and questioning motives. Yeah. And
And
so it makes
there's a real chicken egg there because the connections between OCD and religious obsessiveness are very well documented. And sometimes it's a case of you have this religious foundation and then the OCD grows out of it, or you have OCD tendencies and they manifest in religious compulsion. So it can be a real perfect storm. And as you say in the book, there were rules, and I didn't even know what the rules were, but I was so afraid of breaking them. And
yeah.
that anxiety is so real. And you're also getting these messages from the pulpit. You are in church hearing about weight loss.
Yeah. I went to a Southern Baptist church, and they had a weight loss ministry called First Place. And this is not uncommon in evangelical culture. Like there's this whole realm of religious diet culture. Rick Warren, the author of A Purpose-Driven Life, he kind of helped spearhead one of the big diet culture programs that are in churches. I think it's called the Daniel Fast. But there are
Yeah,
all
you
these
talk about it
different,
in the book, the
yeah.
Daniel fast. Yeah.
But yeah, so in my church, in my Southern Baptist church, it was called First Place, and it was through Lifeway Ministries. And the church that I went to, women weren't allowed to preach, and they really weren't allowed to speak from the pulpit. But the one thing I remember growing up hearing a woman speak from the pulpit was the woman who ran the weight loss ministry. And she got up there and she gave her testimony about how she gained all this weight whenever she had babies, and but she got involved in this weight loss ministry, and they're going to meet on Sunday nights at the same time as youth group, and come join her. So it was this really bizarre use of the pulpit to kind of like instruct women to control themselves and control their bodies and get themselves back in line. And I'm not sure if it was as big of a thing for the entire congregation. As a young girl, it's something I remember very distinctly, and it was very formative for me. It might have just been like this other extra event activity for that other people in the congregation like didn't think too much of, but it was very formative for me as a young girl to see that was the one way that really women got platformed.
Right, exactly. That is where they get to have that place in the pulpit is
Yeah.
talking about self-denial. And as you say in the book, purity culture and diet culture are very similar because they're about keeping women small.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and they like, and not just physically small, but keeping your focus narrow. It's all on like controlling the body. You're not looking outside of yourself. You're trying to diminish your own needs, and you're not looking at the needs of others. And I think that like hyperfixation on the self, you're also made to feel guilty for hyperfixating on the self. Like, so there's this double bind there. But yeah, it's a lot of like control the self, but you're controlling the self in order to not have as much impact in the world. If,
Right. And there's all kinds of, and it translates into religious thinking, purity culture, diet culture. It's you have to be obsessed with your size and your looks, but then you're vain and you're shallow for doing those things, and you're selfish and you're not focused on the important things, and you're supposed to be a certain size and you're supposed to be small, but don't get too small because if you're too small, then you're also, and you talk in the book about this young woman who you knew who was getting too small, and there's you're never going to win. It's just an unwinnable game. Talk to me because you outlined certain behaviors that you had that I'm going to say almost any woman will recognize. Almost any woman who has grown up in diet culture will say, I was doing that at certain points in my life. Run me through some of the things that as an adolescent and as a young woman you were doing to try to control your size and your eating.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was never diagnosed with an eating disorder. I struggled with disordered eating, and that looked like I kept a notebook where I listed every single thing I ate each day with the corresponding number of calories. And I also had this awareness that dieting was not okay for a girl my age to be doing. Like, I needed to do it in order to be acceptable, but I couldn't let anyone know that I was doing it. And so I would use like really cryptic symbols in my notebook just in case my parents stumbled upon it because I didn't want them to know I was dieting. So I had all these like chicken, like I knew what it was saying. So I listed everything I ate. I counted the number of calories. I would have a goal number of calories each day. And like my mood was really dependent upon whether or not I stayed under that goal. I had a certain number of hours I was supposed to exercise each day. And if I wasn't going to hit that number, I would cancel plans or cancel parties, or everything revolved around like hitting those marks. If I binged, which I would because I was hungry and my body would override like this attempt at discipline. If I binged, I would compensate either through even more exercise, or sometimes I would chew and spit food out. I always stayed mostly within the realm of like what a teen magazine would tell you was healthy. Like I was always on this extreme version, but I never did the horrible things. Like I never, not that, you know what I mean? It was like I was still playing within like the rules, but I was certainly, it was taking over my entire life.
Yeah, when you talk in the book about watching America's Next Top Model and eating donuts and then spitting them out, I thought there's probably a generation of millennials who has done the exact same thing. And as you say in the book, and I think this is really something that not a lot of people understand and need to. You say, well, I didn't think I had an eating disorder because I wasn't as you put it, you're not even thin, or because you ate a burger. The idea that eating can be disordered or unhealthy or mentally damaging, that can only be if you, as you said, are doing very extreme things or if you look in a very extreme way. And that's not the case because this was hurting you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's this stereotype that people who have eating disorders are like very thin, almost frighteningly so. That's actually not the case at all. There are a lot of people who are overweight who have eating disorders. The New York Times did this really excellent piece on that a few years ago about people with atypical anorexia. And the only way it's atypical is their BMI is not in that low point, but all the behaviors, all the other health problems that they're having, all of those line themselves up with anorexia. And so we have this like cultural stereotype of what an eating disorder looks like. And there are so many people who do not look like that stereotype at all. And I also think that because this is so normalized for women, like I'm hearing, these messages from the pulpit, like with the weight loss ministry. I'm hearing these messages in teen magazines. I'm like, the, and the idea is that you're not supposed to take it too far, but how far is too far? And at what point does the mental space that it takes up, at what point do we consider the cost of that? And so, because these behaviors were so normalized, it also felt like I don't have a problem. This is just what good women are supposed to do. And maybe we're not supposed to admit to the extent that we're doing these things. But I believed we were all doing it. And Self Magazine had a survey where they interviewed thousands of women, and 78% of women have dealt with disordered eating behaviors in their lifetime. So, I mean, it is a really common thing for women.
Right, because if you've ever sat around at a restaurant with a bunch of women and ordered food, it's probably going to look weird. Like there's a very good chance that something weird is going to get said and done. The odds are just like that. But the challenges are unique in conservative religious communities. You talk a little bit about that in the book, about the specific ways in which people who are women in particular who are in religious communities are affected by OCD and by eating disorder and by disordered behaviors. Talk to me, and also we're going to get into sex and pain, but let's start with the eating disorder part of it, and then we're going to get into vaginismus.
Yeah, I spoke to a mental health counselor who worked with a lot of Southern Christian women, and she said that in her practice, she made the observation that extreme dieting is a good girl's drug of choice. And she said it's the one way you can rebel but still receive praise. And that really resonated with me because what I observed from the women around me growing up and what I observed in my own life was that like disordered eating was kind of like my rebellion. This was my way of like, this is my thing. This is the thing that I have control over. And I knew it was kind of wrong. Like I knew I was like in morally, like I knew something about it was going against what people would tell me, but it was still something that people would praise me for discipline, for these things that are culture values. And so I think that this is a way that women can act out in very prescriptive and regimented spaces. And that's what I observed with the women around me.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other part of it. You were very candid in a really beautiful way in this book about the impact that a religious upbringing can have on your sexual life and sex and pain. You discovered after you were married that you had vaginismus. You talk about being dismissed by a gynecologist early on before you'd even gotten married, right? How did you come to understand what was going on with you? It took a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not really receive sex education. I remember my parents read a Focus on the Family, Dr. Dobson Preparing for Adolescence book with me. And so I knew a little bit about what sex, like the logistics of it, but it was mostly like a lot of don't do it until you get married and then it's wonderful and amazing. But I didn't learn anything about like function or my own body. A lot of it was just like there's this wonderful thing awaiting you once you get married.
Once it stops being terrible and the worst thing that you could possibly ever do that would destroy your life and send you to hell.
Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
pretty much. Yeah.
Just, okay, now it's fine. Now it's
Now
fine.
yeah, yeah, and it's magic. Like you're just gonna, it's magic. So I met the person I was going to marry. We're engaged. We're both saving ourselves for marriage. We're very attracted to each other. I'm like so excited to marry him, but I'm terrified of sex. Like I, at this point in my life, had never worn a tampon, and because I wasn't allowed to, and in my case, it was because my mom feared like the chemicals in the fibers. She had a lot of like cancer in her family, and so it was related to that. But I realized I couldn't get a tampon in, and then I went to my OBGYN to ask for a prescription for birth control, and she couldn't do the pap smear, and I remember I started crying in the exam room because I just thought, how in the world am I going to be able to have sex if I can't do these other things? And she really didn't have much compassion for that at all. She just kind of told me like, well, buy some lube, it'll be fine. And I assumed she had a busy patient load. She went on her way. And then I got married, and my husband was wonderful and patient. And for years and years, I struggled to have sex. Like it was extremely painful. Sometimes it was impossible. I would often cry in part because he was so kind and patient, and I would just wonder like, when's this patience going to run out? Like, at what point is he going to just get sick of this? And I felt so much like I just felt like a failure, like someone whose body wasn't working, and I didn't know what to do to fix it. I didn't know who to turn to. My more conservative friends who had grown up the same way, they didn't seem to be having these problems, or they weren't admitting to them. My more liberal friends who were more open with sex, like they really didn't get it. Um, and so I just felt very isolated and like I should be able to overcome this thing, and yet I seem to be unable to. And this lasted for years.
And at the same time, you're also still dealing with these disordered eating patterns. And one thing I never thought of before, and it's really given me such deep insight, is you talk about how that this vaginismus or sexual pain, that there is a community of women who are dealing with infertility because of this, who can't conceive because of it, and who feel very isolated from the rest of the infertility community because it feels like something you're to somehow be blamed for.
Yeah. I spoke to several women who, same story as me, got married, saved themselves for marriage, could not have penetrative sex, desperately want children. And in the infertility groups, like no one's problem is their problem. And so the women I spoke to have been able to find like more specialized groups, but it was hard. Like they really had to search for it. And yeah, they talked about how there was this very specific grief because it was not the same. They were struggling with infertility, but it wasn't for the same reasons that most people assumed. And it was, again, very hard for them to find help because it was something that so few people talked about, even though this is a fairly common problem for, especially for religiously conservative women. The number is like 1 in 4 women who are in religious spaces, conservative spaces. They will struggle with sexual pain, sometimes to the point where they can't have penetrative sex. And so it's not this like really rare thing. It's pretty common, but no one really talks about it.
Which is fascinating and sad. Just sad that these women are not being helped by their own communities because women's comfort is an afterthought. Given all of that, I think a very typical narrative reading your book might have been, wow, I went through all of this stuff with sexual pain, with shame, with guilt, with disordered eating that occupied my mind well into becoming a parent, well into other health issues in my family, my own child having health issues, while I have a part of my brain that's still thinking, I need to exercise, I need to not eat. And yet, after all that, you are still a Christian.
Yeah.
You still have faith. That is, I think, not uncommon and extraordinary, Anna. Tell me how you found your place to a loving version of Christianity in the midst of some very, very toxic messages.
I think that I had to get to a point where I wasn't sure. So when I was writing this book, I did not know that it would end with me being a Christian. I think I was trying to discover, can I still believe? Can I can I still are these toxic messages, is it Christianity? Like are they one and the same? Or is this something that has seeped into the church that is wrong, that can be filtered out, and I still have a relationship with the God as I understand God, like the faith of that I grew up with. And I think that seeing how some of these toxic beliefs are not just in the church, it's something that's in the larger culture too, and experiencing some of that and realizing that I still believed in like good and evil, and I still believed in sin and forgiveness. And that was something that was a narrative that Christianity offered me for understanding the world, and like I could have access to that forgiveness and grace. I think that seeing that allowed me to stay. I don't know if but I had to be willing to maybe give it up. I I think that that period of questioning was really critical for me being able to stay with integrity without like faking it, without it being this performance of belief when I am not sure if I really believe. I think that like going through this period of testing whether or not what hurt me was actually the core of the faith. I think that was really integral.
Yeah, because now you know what you've chosen
Yeah.
as an adult who has agency in her own life. And that's the difference. And a lot of people never get there. And that's forgiveness.
Yeah.
And that's maturity. Anna, I'm so happy for you that you've come so far, learned so much, and you're telling a story that I think will resonate with so many people, whether you grew up in a fundamentalist religious home or not. If you have ever had to have a meal, particularly if you're a woman in this culture, I think there's a lot that will really resonate with you in this book. It's called Famished on food, sex, and growing up as a good girl. Anna Rollins, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.